Right, we are live. Great news. After a bit of a technical glitch last week, I am super excited to be here this week. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Dr. Yael Joffe. I am founder and chief science officer of 3x4 Genetics. And today I get to talk about my absolute favorite topic, which is why is weight loss so difficult for some and easy for others. And I'm very sure you're going to find a whole lot of understandings and insights from me today. So let's jump straight in. This is kind of my childhood, is the best way to describe it. You know, growing up at the time that I did, if you had a weight problem, this is pretty much how it was described. You were greedy, you had a lack of willpower, you had no self-control. And I've kind of remember being told, you know, if you just had more willpower, you'd be able to kind of lose weight, your face would be so pretty. And it was really kind of a devastating time for anyone who was really battling with their weight. And it continues today. So this isn't something that we've solved. But I really want to acknowledge that if any of you have ever had this told to you or shared with you, or you've kind of thought it for yourself, which is obviously sometimes the biggest problem, is that we own these kind of narrative of being greedy and having self-control, I want you to put it away. I want you to put it away right now as we start exploring something a little bit different. So if it's not about that lack of self-control and about lack of willpower, what is the impact that genetics has on our weight? So we're going to start off with some key science concepts. You don't have to know them deeply, but you just have to understand some core concepts to really understand why our genes impact our weight in such a significant way. So the first concept we're going to deal with is the idea of genetic variation. And there are loads of words to describe this: heritability. And, you know, we talk about kind of nature versus nurture, nature being genetic variation. So what is genetic variation? So we have this DNA sequence code that you must have heard about. You must have heard that in 2003, we launched this draft of this code that we have. And the code that we have in our DNA is really just a language of letters. So imagine like English has 26 letters and we make all these words and sentences and stories. Well, it's no different from genetics. Genetics has 4 letters: C, T, A, and G. And from these letters, we write who we are in this world today. We make amino acids, we make proteins, we make enzymes and hormones, neurotransmitters, brain messages, and really it defines how our body works. So in this beautiful code that we have, what I like to refer to as our blueprint, 99.9% of our code is identical between us. We are absolutely the same in our code. But at 0.1%, we differ from each other. And what this means is that at 0.1%, our spelling in our code is different from each other. Now, it might not sound like much, 0.1%, but 0.1% is about 3 to 4 million places in our DNA where we have what I call spelling changes. So as you can hear, I'm not using this horrible word mutation or that it's the end of the world, doomsday. They just spelling changes. And let's have a look what a spelling change can do. So imagine now we're back into the English language and we have the word coat. We change one letter, C to a G, and suddenly we have a goat. Well, it's not quite as dramatic in genetics, but it's a similar concept that by changing one letter, the science word for these letters is called a nucleotide. By changing one letter in our DNA, sometimes, not always, but sometimes we can change something about our body, about the way our enzymes work, about the way the enzymes are made, our hormones, and we'll talk a little bit more about what those can be. So here's person A and B. This might be me and it might be you. And there is an example of our spelling. Remember, ACTG are the letters we talk about in DNA. And you don't have to understand this very well. All you have to look at is that in person A, it's going to be me today, I have a G and a C because we always have two copies, okay, that they pair together, two of these spelling that pair together. But in person B, which may be you, instead of having a G, there is an A. And because G and C always hold hands and A and T always hold hands, if we change the G to an A, we're going to hold hands with a different letter. No problem. The thing about these amazing letters is when three of these letters join together, they make an amino acid. And I'm sure all of you know about amino acids. Amino acids are the building blocks of protein. So here we got the string of letters grouping together in threes and making amino acids. Well, my amino acid was made by ACG, but your amino acid was made by ACA. And what sometimes happens, if you have a look at my chain of amino acids, is we can actually land up with a different amino acid. And when amino acids build proteins and enzymes, hormones, brain messages, pretty much everything that drives our body, it can change the way the protein works or the enzyme works. And in this case, this spelling change, which changed an amino acid, actually impacted the way that you are able to remove toxins from your body. Now, obviously, this is a little bit simple and it's a little bit more complicated than that, but you get the idea. So what does this give us if we're able to understand that 0.1%, why we are different from each other? This gives us self-knowledge. And I always say, genetics gives us insight into who we are, how we respond to the world around us. This is self-knowledge. And by the world around us, I'm talking about the food we eat, the calories we eat, supplements we take, the exercise we do, the environment we react to, the pollutants we respond with, even something like how we get into cold water and not. We talk about how we encounter stress, how resilient we are. We talk about how we respond to trauma. So when I talk about genetics giving us self-knowledge or insight, I'm talking about insight into how we respond to every single thing we encounter every minute of the everyday. So that is the concept of genetic variation, variability, and we do use the word heritability. Now, this is a trickier word, and I have absolutely no doubt that you have come across this word. It's very trendy at the moment, very popular, and it's the word of epigenetics. So we're going to make it really super simple for you. If genetics was the code, the A's and T's and C's and G's, the letters, epi means above. So above the code, which means when we hear the word epigenetics, we are not changing the code. We're not talking about the 99.9%. We're not talking about a change in code. So what are we talking about? Epigenetics really is the story of how our genes express themselves. Now, again, gene expression is a great term and it's absolutely true, but we can simplify that even more. We can talk about switching on and switching off genes. So the job of epigenetics is to switch on and switch off genes. I walk into my house, I switch on a light, brightens up my room, something has happened. It's exactly the same in the world of epigenetics. I eat something, I drink something, it switches on a gene, it makes a protein, the protein does something in our body, fantastic. Beautiful example. This morning, I had a coffee and I used cow's milk, which has got lots of lactose in. When I drank my coffee and the lactose from the milk went into my body, it sent a signal to the lactase gene. The lactase gene unraveled itself, it coded to make those amino acids in a protein, and it made for me a lactase protein. And guess what that protein does? It's an enzyme for breaking down lactose. So now we have the world of genetics and epigenetics. Genetics tells me, was there a spelling change in that lactase gene so that when I made that enzyme, it isn't working as optimally as I would like it to? So when I drank my coffee this morning and I made my lactase protein, because remember, epigenetics switches on genes, when I made it, it didn't make it optimally. And so when I drank my coffee, I actually had a bit of a stomach ache, some bloating, right? This is the world of epigenetics and genetics. Here's another beautiful example. Favorite vegetables in the whole world. And I know you're probably thinking, what has this got to do with weight? So just hang in there with me. It's all going to come together. We've got to know the terminology before we can understand weight, right? Cruciferous vegetables, most beautiful vegetables, broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, kale, kohlrabi. They contain an extraordinary molecule called glucoraphanin, big mouthful, and an enzyme called myrosinase, another big mouthful. And when we chew our cauliflower and our broccoli, when we eat it raw, if you can't cook it, it won't work, right? It creates this incredible compound called sulforaphane. Some of you might have heard about it. Most exciting molecule of the century. Sulforaphane is so powerful in switching on genes. But it's so extraordinary, sulforaphane, that it not only switches on genes, it switches on many genes. So it switches on something called NRF2 or NRF2. And I call this kind of the multi-switch, the power switch. You know, when you have one of those fancy houses and you walk inside and you switch on the light in the hallway and it switches on all the lights in your house. So it's exactly the same here. NRF2 is a multi-switch. I eat my broccoli, have a lovely cold broccoli salad. I chew it. I generate sulforaphane. Sulforaphane switches on, epigenetically switches on NRF2, and I switch on about 500 genes that are what we call defense genes. They decrease inflammation, they improve detoxification, they improve methylation, they decrease. So this is showing how food we eat and choices we make can switch on genes, right? I think now we're going to finish off this section just by giving you a sense of how important this world of epigenetics is, the world of switching on genes. When I started out in my career, I believed that food and supplements were really the only thing I need to focus on in terms of what switches on genes and what switches off genes. But look at this. I know it might be a bit small, but what it's showing you is pretty much every single thing in your world around you is switching on and switching off genes. Your gut, your microbiome, your mood, depression, anxiety, happiness will change the way that you switch on genes. Social interaction, connection, a hug, laughing, being with someone will change the way that genes switch on and switch. Of course, diet, of course, supplements, exercise, even the weather changes gene expression. So at the end of the day, pretty much everything is going to change gene expression. So just before we head in to weight, let's just make sure we understand genetics, which is our code, 0.1% we're different from each other, plus epigenetics, which is what are we exposing ourselves to that's changing our gene switches, is going to determine our health journey. What I prefer to say, because epigenetics is a bit of a mouthful, no one understands it, is genetics, our code, the insight it gives us in how we respond to the world, plus the choices we make. Because ultimately, epigenetics is about choice. The food we eat, the exercise we do, whether we're living in a moldy house, whether we're taking recreational drugs, whether we're reaching out and connecting with people, all those choices will switch on and switch off genes. And therefore, genetics plus the choices we're making will determine our health journey. H is equal to G plus C. This is the equation of health. And now we're going to switch it up and we're going to talk about weight. But the conversation doesn't change. Just because we're talking about weight doesn't mean that the equation isn't the same. The journey of weight is talking about our genetics, our code, why we're different from each other, plus the choices we make every minute of every day, which are going to switch on and switch off genes. So let's now dive in to where we were with weight. Just a quick sip of coffee. The amazing story is how we discovered so much about the genetics of weight. And I'm going to go through this really quickly because it's kind of sciencey, but it's also pretty amazing because it was actually mice, many mice, that helped us understand how genes impact our weight. So there are 3 different stories I'm going to tell. 3 different mice stories, right? The story of 3 mice. The first one came from an extraordinary researcher, a Professor Friedman, where he discovered that if you took one of the genes out of a mouse, they call this the obleptin mouse, bit of a mouthful. If you took out this one gene, the mouse that didn't have the gene would eat and eat and eat and eat until it became so obese, it would actually die from obesity and diabetes. And they found that when they gave this gene protein back into the animal, it would find a normal weight. And this was this discovery of this amazing protein called leptin, and understanding that in some people, either the leptin gene protein, remember we spoke about the genetic variants changing how well we make proteins, wasn't working so well, or in some, a particularly rare disorder in young children, the leptin gene isn't there at all. They have this appetite that just can't stop. And so they go on to be obese very young. But if they get injections of this leptin protein, they reduce, come back to normal weight. So mouse number 1 taught us that genes can change how we react when we are exposed to food. Mouse number 2 was called the agouti mouse. And this is about we are what our parents eat. Okay, what does this mean? It means that when our parents are pregnant with us in their tummies, what food they're eating could determine to a large degree whether we go on to have more weight difficulty in our lifetime or not. And what they found in these mice was when they didn't have enough B vitamins, we call them methyl donors, but really they're just B vitamins, folate, B6, B12, B2, these genes didn't switch on and switch off. So this agouti mouse is the story of epigenetics. Mouse number 1 was the story of genetics. When these genes weren't switched on and weren't switched off properly, the mouse became obese and also had yellow fur. So it taught us that it wasn't just about the code and whether the gene was there, but also the diet we were feeding these mice could change how obese they became. And our last mouse, absolutely fascinating. I'm sure you're all reading and hearing lots about the microbiome. They did a story in twins. So twins are the most amazing way for us to study genetics, because if you take 2 twins who have the same genes, remember identical twins have the same genes, okay? Have a look at these 2 twins. So the one twin is very slim, and the other twin is more overweight. So then they took 2 mice who were identical mice, the same genetics, and they took microbiomes. So they took like a little poo pellet, really, that's what we do. We take poo pellets to get microbiome, which is your gut, right? Gut microbiota, and they put them into the mice, into their tummies. And what was so incredible is that the mouse who got the poo pellet from the overweight twin grew to be overweight. And the mouse that got the poo pellet from the normal weight individual did not gain weight and become above weight. Now, isn't that extraordinary that there's something happening in our gut, in our microbiome, in our bacteria and yeasts and parasites that's sitting in our gut that will determine to a large degree whether we go on to become overweight? If anything that the story of the 3 mice teaches you is that the genetics of weight is complicated. So if you ever see a Newsweek or a Time magazine or a CNN or anything at all that says we found the obesity gene or this is the obesity gene, it's a red flag for you. You know they're lying. It is not that simple. Right. I'm going to use a true story. I'm going to use quite a few true stories today. So thank you to those that allowed me to use their stories today. And I want to introduce you to Mr. and Mrs. Smith in 2005, fall in love, and they get married. And they start having babies. So in 2014, they now have 3 children. You can see the oldest son, then a daughter, and then a little baby. And you can see that Mrs. and Mrs. Smith, a little bit chubby, definitely above what we would probably recommend as being a healthy weight. And we can also see in the older son starting to get a little bit more portly, a little bit more chubby, but that other daughter looking slim and trim, and the baby, well, we don't know yet. Here we are in 2020, and we see an evolution of the family. So Mr. and Mrs. Smith have definitely continued to gain weight. Our oldest son, who's now 13, has continued to gain weight. The baby that was in the arms of Mrs. Smith has started growing up, and you can see has that kind of same body type where is more likely to be chubby than slim. But our second daughter has remained slim and trim. So I hope there's something about this that resonates with you, either for your own family or for a family you know, or yourself. How come my sisters, my brothers find it so easy to remain slim and it's so hard for me? How come in my children, one of my children really is super slim and the others are really bad? Like everyone knows someone or has experienced it in their own family. All right. So why do we see this difference even within the same family? So you've all heard of the concept of nature versus nurture. Nature is genetics. It is code. It is spelling changes. It's 0.1%. Who are we and how do we respond to the world around us? Nurture is every single thing we do in our life, the food we eat, our family, how much TV we watch, how much time we spend on our devices, how much exercise we do, where we live, mood disorders, all these things. And so what we want to understand is if we take identical twins, and again, I mentioned this in science, who are brought up in different environments. So the best research that's done in genetics is they find identical twins, same DNA, but who were adopted at birth and brought up in different environments. One might have been brought up with McDonald's and fast food, sitting on the couch and drinking lots of coffee and wine. And the other one might have like healthy food, lots of exercise, drinking lots of water. How does that manifest in their weight? And that gives us a lot of information about just how much does genetics count towards whether we land up being more overweight or less. And this has the question, remember the Mrs. Smith family, are the parents to blame? Now, I'm a parent of 2 children, and that comes with an extraordinary amount of guilt, and I have Jewish mommy guilt landed on top of that. How much are we responsible for whether our children grow up to be a little bit overweight or whether to be slim? Now, I usually do a poll survey. Unfortunately, I can't do it on the platform we're using today. So in your head, ask yourself, how much do you feel responsible for the weight of your children? Do you think you have? Or if you don't have kids, how much do you think the responsibility is of the parents in determining the weight of their children versus the genetics? Remember, nature versus nurture. And this is an amazing article, it's quite old, 2008, that asked that exact question. What is the genetic influence on childhood obesity despite what we call an obesogenic environment? Now, obesogenic, fancy word inside, it just means I'm not making good decisions, right? Obesogenic environment means poor dietary choices and sitting on the couch too much, what we call a sedentary lifestyle. Okay, prepare yourselves. You're not going to expect this. Have that number in your head of how much you think genetics counts and how much nature counts, how much nurture counts. Here's what this article found. 10%. Bet you no one had the answer right. And what is it telling you? That 10% is not genetics. 10% is the decisions being made in your house, the food that you're giving your kids, how much time they're on their devices. So basically what I'm saying is, parents, if you're carrying this guilt with you, you can put the guilt down. Obviously, it has an impact. You cannot feed your children McDonald's every day and have them lie on the couch all day, but it's not as bad as you thought it was. That genetics, in fact, is having a very, very big contribution, especially in childhood. Now, the reason I say especially in childhood is because as we grow older, we get a lot of psychosocial issues with it. Comfort feeding, or anxiety, depression, mood disorders, environmental things, socio-demographic, financial affordability. But as children, genetics is easier to study than when we're grown-ups. And they found that only 10% of the environment that a child is brought up in will actually determine their weight, but that genetics will be the 90%. But that's quite an extreme amount. Let's have a look at this number rather. So when we use this number, heritability, what does it mean? It means just how much is coming from your genes. So if we talk about the heritability of height, we know that height is like 90%. Most of an individual's height comes from their genes, not from so much from what they're eating in the environment. Okay, so when we talk about weight, how much of my weight, your weight, is coming from genes? It is somewhere between 40 to 80%. Another red flag for you, if anyone tells you the heritability of weight is 50%, it's impossible, right? It cannot be one number. It's always going to be a range. Why would it be a range? Because for me, my genes might be accounting for a huge amount of my journey in weight. But for you, so I might be like 80% of my genes are pushing me to eat calories, store calories, and not burn up calories. For you, it might be like 40% or 50%. So it's not one number. We're all different. Remember, 0.1%. At 3 to 4 million places in our DNA, we're different. How can it all be the same for us? So when you see things like the blood group diet, it's not possible. Blood group is one gene that you can divide everyone up into one category or 3 categories or 5. Not everyone will do well on paleo. Not everyone will do well on keto. Not everyone will do well on intermittent fasting, because we are all different and we're going to get a range. Having said that, 40 to 80% is still a big deal, right? We kind of, if you look at the middle, it's like at least half of my journey around weight is coming from my genes and half from my epigenetic environment, the choices I'm making every single day. Right, where do you fit in? This is a brilliant study. I'm going to make it very simple for you. Okay, on one side, we've got BMI. BMI is body mass index. It's a terrible measure of weight, but in research, they often use it. It just means in this kind of world of measuring where we fit, are we a little bit higher in our weight compared to our height and everyone else in our kind of age group, or are we lower? So the higher BMI means we're more likely to be heavier. Lower BMI, we're likely to be lighter. Obesogenic environment, I mentioned to you, when you see the word obesogenic, it's just like I'm eating badly and I'm not exercising. That's what it means. If we say a non-obesogenic environment, means I'm making great choices and I'm exercising regularly. Now, this fantastic research article by Bouchard came out quite a long time ago, but why it's so great is they divided up that 40 to 80% into 4 different groups. I'm going to tell you through the 4 different groups. And as I'm doing that, I want you to think to yourself, oh, that's where I fit. Or, oh, my sister fits there, or my mother fits there, or my brother, or my best friend fits there. So start with yourself, your children, your friends, but they're really kind of 4 groupings, right? And to be honest, the top one and the bottom one are quite rare. So mostly you're going to figure out whether you fit into the 2 middle ones. So let's start at the top one. Okay. Genetic obesity. What does that mean? Have a look at it. It's a red line. It means that my BMI is going to be high no matter the choices I make. So even if I eat the best food and I exercise until the cows come home, I will have a BMI. I have genetically driven obesity. It means that my genes are pushing me very strongly to be obese, no matter what the choices I make. The good news is this is very rare, and the genes that create and determine genetic obesity are very rare genes. So we're talking about a couple of % of the population. So this is very unlikely to be those of you who are listening to this, but it definitely occurs. And it's what we call kind of medical genetics, where the genes are so powerful that our choices in life make very little impact. Right. Let's do the bottom one, and then we'll come back to the middle 2. The bottom one is the opposite of genetic obesity. It's called genetically resistant. I am resistant to becoming obese. You all know these people, again, fairly rare. No matter what they eat, they remain thin. No matter how much they eat, they remain slim. In fact, they're often very, very slim. And their journey in life is just as tough because, first of all, everyone thinks that they have an eating disorder because they're so slim. And they actually would like to gain some weight to flesh out a bit because they're usually very, very slim, but their genes are fighting against them gaining weight. So they are genetically resistant to gaining weight. Again, very rare, but we've all met them. We all know them. And don't ever assume that their journey is any easier than the ones who are genetically obese. Okay. Now, for the 99.99% of us who fit in the middle, let's talk about that middle. Okay. So strong predisposition. What does that mean? It means I have a strong genetic predisposition to gain weight. So if you look at the BMI, it means that my baseline weight is a little bit higher. So I start at a slightly higher weight. But if I make bad decisions in the food I'm eating, and I make bad decisions in the exercise, in other words, I'm not exercising and I'm eating badly, I will very easily gain weight and become overweight. And if I continue with the decisions that I'm making, bad choices, no exercise, I will go on to be obese. So my genes are pushing me to become overweight and obese when I'm making poor lifestyle decisions. Now, slight genetic predisposition means that my baseline, in other words, I probably was a very slim child, like it wasn't really an issue for me until I grew older and I wasn't doing so much exercise, right? So it's been generally kind of easy to manage my weight. Now, maybe not so much. So my baseline weight is quite good, but when I make bad decisions about my diet and my lifestyle, my weight will go up. I am very likely to become overweight, but it would be very, very hard for me to become obese. So now I want you to think to yourself, strong genetic predisposition, my baseline weight is always a little bit higher than others, super easy to gain weight, to become overweight. And if I really don't manage my lifestyle, I will become obese. Slight predisposition, kind of never been a major story for me. Maybe now, perimenopausal, bad choices, COVID, I have gained weight and I've become overweight, but really unlikely I've ever been obese in my life. Okay, now you understand that for different people, genes are driving us differently. So this is a fantastic study that is going to illustrate what I just showed you in the 4 categories. It was done in Japan. Again, quite an old study, 2005, but I love it. And they enrolled 154 Japanese men who were overweight. They were not obese, they were overweight. Now, because the study was done, 2 things, in Japan and in 2005, the diet program that they put them on was a low calorie, low fat, low sodium diet. Now, we would never use a low-fat, low-sodium diet anymore. This is very old-fashioned. But anyway, the point being that they reduced their calories. So they were all had a BMI around 27, so not obese, but overweight. And they reduced their calories down to what we would regard like a low-calorie diet, not super low, but low-calorie diet. And they had to exercise more than an hour a day. Kind of landed up being close to 20,000 steps. Now, if you've ever tried to do 10,000 steps a day, you know that it takes some effort. So you can imagine trying to achieve like 20,000 steps. They could run, they could cycle, but they had to get that kind of a thing. And here's the thing, they did it for 2 years, 24 months. They reduced their calories and they did it and they exercised for 2 years. Now let's have a look what happened to these 154 Japanese men. So at the end of 2 years, they grouped them into 4 categories, depending on how they had lost weight over the 2 years. And this is the part that we're interested in. Let's start with top right-hand corner, my top right-hand corner, the one that says 24%. So of the group who reduced their calories, and everyone behaved, right? No one dropped out. No one was sneaking food. No one lay in bed and didn't exercise. They all followed the program, exercise and low calories for 24 months, right? At the end of 24 months, 24% of them had lost weight in the first 6 months. They lost all the weight they needed to lose in 6 months, but they managed to maintain the weight loss until the 24 months. This is a perfect outcome. We wish this was for everyone, and this is what we're trying to achieve, because losing weight is only a very small part of the equation. Maintaining weight loss over 2 years defines success. So 24% lost weight and maintained it. All right, let's look at the next group. 23% of the group lost weight in the first 6 months, but over the 18 months that followed, they had what we call rebound weight gain, where the weight came back again. So even though they lost the weight, by the time they finished 2 years, the weight was back again. Okay, next group number 3, big percentage, 39% had very slow weight loss. So at 6 months, where group 1 and group 2 had lost all the weight, this group were not even close. So when you go to a practitioner and they say, you're going to lose half a kilogram a week, or you're going to lose a pound a week, it's nonsense. Everyone loses weight in a completely different way. And this is illustrated in this group. 39%, they had very low weight loss. At 6 months, they were not even half the way of group 1 and 2. But at 24 months, they had lost the same amount of weight as group 1, and obviously had maintained that weight loss, but it had been very, very slow, very difficult, very frustrating, but very slow. But here is the most interesting group number 14, number 4, 14% of the group. So it wasn't 1%, it wasn't 2%, 14% of this group did not lose weight for 24 months, even though they decreased their calories, followed the eating program, and exercised at 20,000 steps for 2 years, and they did not lose weight. Now, I always say that why I love this study so much is there is no other country in the world, except Japan, where people would have stayed on a weight loss program for 2 years, even when they were not losing weight. If it was me and I got to 6 months and I wasn't losing weight, I would have walked out and said, thank you very much, I'm done. But what makes this study so good is that they continued for 2 years, even when they were not losing weight. So it just shows that we all lose weight in a completely different way. We gain it back in a different way. We maintain it in a different way. And for some of us, weight loss is actually extremely difficult. And what they did, which of course we love because we work in genetics, is that they had a look at the genes to see why did people land up in group 1, 2, 3, or 4? Could it be explained by the type of genetic variation they have? Remember, that code change, that changes how we respond. We're going to talk about what that is now. And absolutely, that is what they found in this study, that the genes were different, the genetic variants, those 0.1% were different, depending on which group they landed up in. So what we talk about at 3x4 is we talk about the idea of energy. And I always say the story of weight is the story of energy. So I hate talking about dieting, but I love talking about energy, because when I was growing up, and certainly in my first dietetics degree, very disappointing degree, really didn't enjoy it, which was all diet. It was like, if you eat this amount of calories and do this amount of exercise, you will lose weight. Well, that was absolute nonsense. We all know that now. So what is the story? The story is actually very complex. And this is an infographic we actually have in our 3x4 report that gives you your story of energy, because it kind of goes something like this, right? I'm going to go, this will explain it better. This is the story of energy. The first thing is, how do we engage with food? Because hunger, appetite, satiety determine how many calories we're going to consume. So if you're like me and you just love food, when I see food and it's delicious and it smells lovely, I just want to eat food. Okay. One of the greatest things I ever learned, and we'll talk about this more, is that we do not experience hunger, appetite, or satiety in the same way. Satiety means, how full do I feel after I've eaten? Okay, we're going to go into details of each one. The second one was releasing fat. So how do I burn up fat in my body? So I've got fat stores. How do I burn up that fat? Okay, does my body like opening up those fat cells and giving out energy, or does it like hanging on to it? Inflammation is a fundamental part of health, of pretty much all disease, but very much part of weight. If your body is in an inflammatory state, you will not lose weight. We'll talk about that more. The next one is energy expenditure at rest and during exercise. So growing up in my childhood, but also studying dietetics, this is pretty much the only thing we spoke about is metabolic rate. We'd say like, oh my God, I've got this friend and she eats whatever she wants because she just burns up everything she eats. Well, yes, it's true. But it's only one part of your journey, one part of your story. For some people, they're very efficient at burning up energy, especially during exercise, but not everyone. I know someone who might be listening who used to train for Comrades, which is like an 89-kilometer ultra endurance. And no matter how much she trained, it didn't shift her weight. So not everyone can use exercise to be able to manage their calorie balance. Okay. And then the last one is kind of what I call the executive summary. It's the real summary. It's like the concept of weight loss resistance. For some of us, we gain weight easily, we lose weight with difficulty. In others, we don't gain weight easily, and it's easy to lose weight. This is the concept of weight loss resistance. This is the story of energy. So quickly, let's touch on each one. I did kind of mention this. I love this area. This is one of my greatest aha moments that I ever had. That if you and I sat down to eat a burger, a cheeseburger with fries, and we had been fasting for 12 hours, how hungry we were, if we could measure it on a scale, would be different. We would experience hunger in a different way. Then we would eat our cheeseburger and fries, chips, if you're in South Africa, and how full we felt after that cheeseburger would be completely different. So I might say, well, that was a lovely snack. I think I'm going to order another cheeseburger. And you might say, I'm so full, I actually can't breathe. I can't get up. I'm like in a food coma. I can't stand up, right? So how we experience hunger and satiety is completely different. It's not just about hunger and satiety. It's also about eating behavior. We talk about snacking, binge eating. Everyone, so remember my first slide, willpower, self-control, not true. Genetics drives eating behavior. Snacking is a genetically driven eating behavior. So for some individuals, intermittent fasting is super hard for those of us who like to snack every few hours. And there are two interesting genes. There are many interesting genes. I'm just going to talk about two today. This one is called FTO, or the fat mass and obesity gene. Very weird name. I think they call it that because they don't really know what it does. But it has a lot to do with how we respond to food when we engage with it. And I have named it the buffet gene. And the reason I call it the buffet gene is if you're the kind of person who walks in, if you've ever been to Israel and you've been to a hotel and you go down for breakfast, you've never seen better breakfast buffets in your entire life, right? So you go into this delicious buffet and there's just this gorgeous, beautiful food everywhere. For some of us, we will go and get a plate and we will eat it. And we'll go back and get another plate and another plate and another plate. Long past our hunger, long past feeling full, because what we call the locus of control around food, our ability to moderate our consumption of our food, is decreased by our exposure to this beautiful, delicious food. And FTO, this sneaky gene, is one of them. So when we have a gene variant, a spelling change, we call the TA. So some people have a T spelling version and some people have an A. And when you have the spelling change, you are more likely to engage repeatedly with your buffet than someone who goes to a buffet, just gets one plate and goes, I'm full. I've never been able to understand that. So generally, I try to stay away from buffets. Okay, changing my behavior to manage my genetic inheritance. MC4R, it stands for melanocortin-4 receptor gene, has a lot to do with appetite and satiety. How full we feel, how hungry we feel, and again, a spelling change that we can test in a genetic test, and we do test in 3x4, to be able to see whether we're more likely to experience greater hunger and less fullness. Beautifully researched genes, these FTO and MC4R have been around for decades, have like hundreds and hundreds of research papers helping us understand why some people are more driven. And we see this particularly in children. FTO and MC4R are very well researched in children to see why some kids have a greater appetite than others. And it was described to me by one child who was quite overweight that they have a greedy stomach. Their tummy just wants to eat all the time. And remember, this is why we need to leave behind the labels: greedy, willpower, self-control. It is not part of our conversation now. DRD2, fascinating gene. And in fact, there are four of them: DRD1, 2, 3, 4. And they work in the space of what we call dopamine receptors. Now, I'm sure you all know about dopamine. Dopamine is what we call a neurotransmitter or a brain messenger. And it's a feel-good hormone. So when we do certain things, we produce dopamine in our brain, and it makes us feel content and happy and satisfied. And there are multiple things that can make us do that. Eating carbohydrates, especially refined carbohydrates, eating sugar, exercising, taking drugs, drinking too much alcohol. All these behaviors drive dopamine. So there's a lot of work in the science around addiction behavior and showing that some of these genes are associated with addiction. Now, addiction doesn't have to be alcoholism. It doesn't have to be gambling addiction. It can be reaching out for behaviors that will satisfy our dopamine and give it a boost when our body isn't doing it for ourselves. So often this, like a lot of people talk about comfort eating or sugar cravings or carb cravings. Often it's actually looking for foods, because carbs are most powerful in driving dopamine levels. So when we do a genetic test on someone, remember, we're looking for spelling changes in these genes, in the DRD genes, and we can see whether for you, you're more likely to choose things that will push up your dopamine. Now, the great news is we know how to help, because lots of behaviors, including exercise, cold water swimming and immersion, lots of other things, meditation, will switch on your dopamine genes without you having to resort to carbohydrate and sugar. We can help with that, but it's really helpful understanding what is going on in the brain. Okay, we've spoken about how am I doing on time? Ooh, running a bit late. I think we're getting near the end. Fat release and storage. How do I store fat? Do I just love storing fat? Or am I really good at burning it up and releasing it? And I love this picture because this is one of the genes, PPR gamma, and it's the concept of a thrifty gene. And thrifty genes are hunter-gatherer genes. Now imagine in the hunter-gatherer, maybe this is not hunter-gatherer, but imagine like the plains of Africa, and we are like scrounging for roots and berries where we can find them, and then suddenly someone kills a big antelope, and we eat this antelope, and we eat lots because we don't know when we're going to get another antelope to eat. So those of us who are able to consume energy and store it and hold onto it are more likely to survive on the plains of Africa than those who consume food, burn it up, and it's gone. So the great irony of the time is those of us who are more likely to gain weight easily, hold on to our fat stores and not burn it up, were ancestrally really more likely to survive. But of course, in this era, not. And PPR gamma is what we call a thrifty gene, where those of us who've got the spelling change, the C spelling change, are more likely to hold on to food and protect our adipose story from being burnt up. And I just thought this was absolutely fascinating. It takes somewhere between 184 and 1,840 generations of natural selection to go through genetic change. People always say to me, do I need to do a genetic test again? And I say, no, you only do it once in your life because your genes don't change. And you can see from this, it takes between 5,000 and 53,000 years for our DNA to change. Now, what happened is we have what I call, and this is what we call evolutionary biology. We had ancestral DNA from the plains of Africa, hunter-gatherer, but we didn't have McDonald's or supermarkets or fast food or delivery services or high fructose corn syrup, and the list goes on. But today we do. So what I always talk about is the issue of energy and weight is actually what's happened between a clash between our ancient DNA, which has not changed significantly, and our environment, which has changed hugely. You know, we used to cook food, grow food, everything from scratch, out of the ground, not loaded with pesticides, a lot of work trying to make butter, a lot of work trying to get an egg from a chicken. And so what we have is a disconnect between our ancestral DNA and how big the disconnect is will be determined by the genetic spelling changes you have and obviously the choices that you're making. Okay, back to energy expenditure. Well, we spoke about this. It's metabolic rate. You have two kind of versions of it. One is I'm sitting at my desk like I am now. How much energy am I burning when I'm doing nothing? And then if I go for a walk, take the dogs for a walk in the park, and I'm kind of walking quite hard, how much energy will I burn up? It is different for every single individual. Some people are just super good at burning up energy, sitting at their desk, or very good when they use exercise. So some people say, well, if I just manage my exercise, I don't have to worry about what I'm eating. That is not true for everyone, because for some people, exercise will not have that impact. Now, exercise is brilliant for you on a million different levels, aside from weight. So please don't misunderstand. Exercise is going to save your brain, your memory, your cognition, your functional, go on. But it's not just about weight management, why we exercise. Okay, this is one of the genes, ADRB2. I put the marshmallow, it probably wasn't a great analogy to have the marshmallow, but I was thinking of kind of burning up, because this adrenergic receptors is one of the genes that help us figure out whether we're really good at burning up energy when we're sitting. And ADRB3 is really good at understanding, well, am I really good at burning up energy when I exercise? So this is the kind of genes they looked at when they were looking at the Japanese study. Oh, that's why I've got the slide here to remind us that these kind of genes are what they studied when they did the Japanese study. And they could see that the kind of spelling changes they had in those ADRB2 genes were different for the groups. Inflammation, I mentioned before. Inflammation is very closely tied with overweight and obesity. As we gain weight, these are what we call adipocytes or fat cells. They're very beautiful, not very healthy, but very beautiful. And what happens with them is we get more of them in our body and they grow bigger. And those little black things around them are what we call macrophages, which are like little inflammatory markers. As our fat stores grow bigger and multiply, we get more and more of what we call our inflammatory cytokines or markers, making us more inflamed. So gain weight, more inflammation. Inflammation, we know, is the baseline for diabetes, heart disease, arthritis, fatigue, pretty much everything. It is almost impossible to lose weight when our body is in this inflamed state. We've got to break the cycle. So part of an intervention of managing weight is trying to understand, do you have spelling changes in your genes that are making you more likely to have inflammation in your body? And then what can we do using epigenetics, supplements, foods, lifestyle to decrease the inflammation? Because in some people, just managing inflammation is what unlocks the ability to lose weight. This is the big gene. My whole PhD was done on TNF alpha. Tumor necrosis factor alpha is probably the many genes in inflammation, but this is like the number one big one that determines how likely we are to have high inflammation in our body or not. And the last one, what I call the executive summary, right? The struggle is real. The struggle is real. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. When I started off as a dietitian, and people would say, if I went to them and said, like, I followed your diet sheet, I did everything you said, I haven't lost weight. And they'll say, well, obviously you cheated. You know, like, you've probably been snacking, you're lying to me. That is not the story. The struggle is real. For some of us, we gain weight very easily and we lose weight with difficulty. For some of us, having a BMI of 23 or 24 is not going to be realistic. And we need to manage what is realistic, what does healthy look like. There is always something we can do. There is always something we can do. So it's not like, oh, my genes, well, you know, I'm like 80% genetic. That is not the story. If we understand which genes, which spelling changes are changing something in your body, in your metabolic rate, in how you metabolize foods, inflammation, appetite satiety, we can help you manage what that journey is. So genetics gives us insight to take better action. If you ever see a genetic testing company telling you whether you should have 30% of carbs and 50% of protein, it's nonsense. Genetics cannot give you this information. A practitioner who's highly trained in genetics can work with you to define what is the best intervention. But if just a genetic test says you should be on a 50% carb diet, that is not the insight that genetics is giving. So I just wanted to put a red flag on that. And finishing off just the last couple of slides, I think I'm coming in at perfect timing. So this is a 3x4 genetic test. And this is we look at 36 different pathways and many different areas, but this is just the story of energy. And the way we talk about a 3x4, we talk about follow the purple, because we don't want to complicate the science. We want to say, where are your genes having the greatest impact on your story of energy? And I know we're using words like adipogenesis, the ability to burn up energy, energy expenditure, again, how we burn up energy, weight gain and weight loss resistance, exercise response, how do we respond to exercise, appetite, satiety, and intake. We've spoken about that. How hungry am I? How easily do I get full? And then inflammation, which is the one below. And follow the purple. So what we do is we look at all the genes that impact these areas, we score them together, and we give you an impact. So for each of these lines, there's like 10, 15, 20 genes that are behind. You get a score for all your spelling changes that'll determine what color you get. So you can see in this one, and you'll see just now who this one belongs to, we follow the purple. The purple is where the impact is. So where it says very high, put the word impact or put the word genetic influence. There is a very high genetic influence. Or low, under inflammation, there is a very low genetic influence. How much is my genes contributing to to my energy story. If I know this, then I can make better decisions and better epigenetic choices on what's going on in my life. So I'm going to finish off again. Thank you very much to my family. This is my family. That is my mom, Brenda, and my two sisters. I've got an older sister and I've got a younger sister. And what we did, of course, because I founded this company, is we did the genetics on all four of us because we were interested to see, as growing up, there was really a difference between how I was engaging with food, my appetite and weight, and my sisters and my mom. So when we were able to test this, we obviously tested all four of us to see if there was a difference. Remember that we started off with Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and we showed how one of the children really didn't battle with weight at all, with appetite, and the others did. So I did the same with my sisters and my mom. So, and this is what you see. Remember, follow the purple. The purple will be impact. Now, people always say, but if my mom did a test, do I need to do one? Well, here's your answer. You can't guess what you got, because remember, you get genes from your mom and genes from your dad, and it's the combination that will determine. So you can see here, there's a lot of purple between the four of us, but you can see that one of my sisters, it was not such an issue. So my mom, who has spent a lot of her life managing her weight and being very careful and very restrained around food. And you can see that top left, my mom, lots of purple around eating and hunger, around how you burn up energy. So for my mom, who had a lifelong journey of making sure that she really controlled her intake and exercised, okay? You can see me, I was the one in the weight low. Definitely my journey. And it has been from the first time I can remember. I have always had this difficulty of keeping a balance between weight gain and not going from overweight into obesity. I absolutely could drive myself into obesity by making bad lifestyle choices. And remember that thing that said, if I make good choices, I can kind of have a high baseline, but steady. If I make bad choices, I'll become overweight. A strong genetic predisposition, I could become obese if I allowed myself to, right? And if I made really poor choices. I have another sister who has, as you can see, the exact same as me, but my other sister is lots of yellow, which means that for her, it hasn't been as difficult journey when it comes to weight, when it comes to energy, when it comes to balancing it. So I thought this was just a great way to show you that we all need to know our own story. When we know self-knowledge and insight and working with a professional who really understands, okay, how to make the best choices is so empowering to change the narrative of what we have inherited. That is all for today. Thank you so much for joining me. You can go online if you want to have a look at a sample report, because I only showed you weight, but of course there are 36 pathways, and I think I showed you 6. Our website is www.3x4genetics, or you can email us at info@3x4genetics.com. But we would love you to also step in and have this amazing liberation of understanding who you are, your self-knowledge. Thanks, everyone. It's been amazing having this opportunity to talk to you.